I always thought the small town of Osaka was idyllic. The people were kind, the community was tight-knit, and an expansive field welcomed children to play whatever sport was in season. Kenny Layton would hand me a warm, fragrant loaf of bread every morning as I walked past his bakery on my way to school. Reflecting back, he must have given me around $300 worth of bread over the years. The buildings, though small and ancient, were sturdy, their foundations of breccia rock solid. Folks never locked their doors, embracing the neighborly spirit. Larry Anderson, our sly neighbor, always tried to rile up my dad with small talk about the Vikings and Packers games. My dad, a devoted Vikings fan, tried to dodge Larry, whose allegiance to the Packers was unshakable. It was amusing to watch my normally calm father get worked up, his face flushed with suppressed curses whenever Minnesota lost to Green Bay. Osaka was a wonderful town until I discovered the horrors lurking in the house on the hill. My father, a single dad, did his best to give us a normal life. He worked in advertising, crafting handmade advertisements, since technology was beyond his comfort zone. After my mother died from pneumonia when I was 6, he cried a lot, begging doctors not to take her away. His grief was palpable, and I avoided mentioning my mother to spare him further pain. The house was filled with pictures of her, and I often caught him staring at them with a sorrowful expression. One day, while playing outside, I noticed the imposing house on the hill. It was an old, sprawling wooden mansion, its grandeur stark against the modest homes in town. Overcome with curiosity, I asked my dad about it. "Dad, who lives in that big house on the hill? It's so huge it could fit the whole town." He shook his head, smiling. "That's old man Wendell's place. He made his fortune in real estate and built that mansion for some peace and quiet. He keeps to himself, and that's fine with me. Don't bother him, and he won't bother you." I nodded and resumed playing with my Buzz Lightyear toy, marveling at its buttons and wings. Little did I know, the house on the hill harbored secrets far darker than anyone in our quaint town could imagine. My dad once told me that my mother had bought me the toy and given it to me before she passed. I treasured it as if it were the Holy Grail. Teddy and I were playing cops and robbers on my front lawn, with Teddy always being the robber because of the prominent scar on his cheek from a dog attack when he was young. Teddy asked me about the house on the hill, and I relayed my dad's explanation. But Teddy had heard different stories. He said that some kids at school claimed vampires and goblins lived there, and if you saw them, they'd turn you into one of them, condemning you to an eternity in hell. Though it unnerved me a bit, I trusted my dad over the tales spun by schoolyard storytellers. "We should go up there and check it out," Teddy declared, puffing out his chest with mock bravado. "We'd be in the history books of this town." I told him my father advised against disturbing Mr. Wendell, who valued his privacy and had made his millions in real estate. Teddy sighed, suggesting we resume our game with him about to rob a bank. Over the next few years, Teddy continued to badger me about exploring the house. I always told him I wasn't interested and that he should go alone if he was so eager and brave. Teddy finally declared he'd venture up there after his parents went to bed and asked if I wanted to join him. I declined, preferring not to risk a beating and enduring my dad's disappointment. The next morning, my father called me downstairs for breakfast. The aroma of toast and eggs wafted through the house, making my mouth water. As always, an extra plate was set for my mother, though it remained empty, a symbol of my father's enduring grief. "Teddy's father called," my dad said, a note of concern in his voice. "He asked if Teddy came around last night. Do you know anything about that?" My heart sank and my stomach churned. I hated lying to my dad, but didn't want to betray my best friend. I frowned and told him I had no idea where Teddy might have gone. My dad asked if Teddy had mentioned anything to me, and I denied it, feeling a heavy weight of guilt. He reassured me and told me to eat before the Vikings game started. That night, I lay in bed, thinking of Teddy and the rumors of vampires and goblins. I tossed and turned, imagining Teddy as a vampire with blood dripping from his mouth and razor-sharp teeth. The thought terrified me, but I tried to dismiss it as mere stories meant to scare kids like me. Teddy was never seen again. Over time, the town stopped talking about him as if he never existed. I tried to bring him up with my teachers, but they would just smile sadly and quickly change the subject. As I grew older, my curiosity about the house on the hill persisted, but never burned hot enough to drive me to explore it. I went off to college in Iowa, returning to Osaka for holiday breaks to check on my father. I would visit for Thanksgiving and Christmas, enjoying the traditional holiday meals he prepared. But the mystery of the house on the hill and the fate of Teddy lingered in the back of my mind, a dark shadow over the otherwise cheerful memories of my childhood. He still set out a third plate for my mother, which brought a tear to my eye every time. I'd have to excuse myself to the bathroom to regain my composure, making sure he didn't see my sadness. I wasn't sad about my mother anymore. I felt sad for him. He was getting older, and I wanted nothing more than for him to meet someone else, to find true happiness. But it was clear he was just waiting to join my mother in the afterlife. The next morning after Thanksgiving, I packed up the little I had brought and said my goodbyes. My father always joked about me staying away from all the ladies falling at my feet. I laughed and replied that if there were any ladies, I sure wouldn't trip over them. As I got in my car, I glanced out the window towards the house on the hill. I thought of Teddy and his sudden disappearance, and how the town seemed to forget about him. Nobody really looked too hard for Teddy. It was as if they accepted he was gone and wasn't coming back. Other missing kids across the nation sparked manhunts, but for Teddy, there were only whispers. I started driving down the dirt road leading to Main Street, my eyes never leaving the house on the hill. It felt like it was calling my name, pulling me into its dark veil. Why not check it out? Why not see who lives there? I looked at the passenger seat and noticed a small turkey I'd brought from my dad. He didn't want it because he had already bought a big one, so I decided to take it back to my apartment. This was my excuse to not seem creepy if someone answered the door. I could introduce myself and hand over the turkey with a fake smile. Instead of turning right as usual, I made a left towards the house. The gravel road leading up to the wooden mansion was flanked by dying grass, the season's change taking its toll. As I got closer, a thick fog enveloped my car. I turned on my brights, hoping to see through it. Not knowing if there was anything to avoid, I stopped my car, grabbed the turkey, and started walking. The fog wrapped around me, welcoming me into its shroud. It hadn't been this foggy at my father's house, why now? I kept walking, trying not to stumble into anything. The fog seemed to guide my steps, and soon I saw the looming features of the house, towering over me like a stern guardian. My neck cracked as I took a deep breath, stepping onto the front porch. I raised my hand to knock, but the door creaked open before I could. I tiptoed inside, calling out to see if anyone was there. The door must have been unlatched, I thought, but no one answered. The lights were off and the air was musty and moldy. Feeling along the walls, I found no light switches, only the rough texture of the wood. I ventured further into the darkness, and suddenly the lights blazed on, blinding me like a camera flash. I stood there, frozen, as the house seemed to come alive around me. I looked around the gigantic foyer, standing amidst the cornices, which were all draped in massive spider webs. Dust coated the ground, and I could see my footprints where I had stepped. It looked like this place hadn't been occupied in years. There was a single door inside the big foyer, which seemed odd to me. I was studying to become an architect, and a design like that was uncommon in fact. I'd never heard of something like it. I walked to the door, creating a trail of footprints, and opened it hesitantly. The new room smelled like body odor and rotten milk. The lights flickered on as I walked further into the darkness, and the sight before me brought me to my knees. The walls were covered with people, hanging with their mouths sewn shut. They looked drained of life, their faces and urine staining the walls beneath them. Their clothes were drenched in sweat, and they hung like ragdolls, tubes going into their stomachs and running into holes built into the walls. Their eyes were all fixated on me, as if they all just wanted to die rather than live in this place. They were alive, about 50 people hung up on the walls, gazing at me, their eyes screaming for help, most in tears at the sight of me. I looked to the right-hand side of the room and noticed a woman. She looked like the woman from the pictures in my father's hallway, only older and weathered. It was my mother. I quickly got up and ran over to her, tears streaming down her face like a river, as if she recognized me. She was too high for me to reach, even if I tried jumping. There was no ladder or anything for me to climb. The clamps bolted to the walls were secured tightly. There must have been a key somewhere in this house of misery. Swung my head around to the right and saw a man my age trying to wiggle free. As I got closer, I noticed a scar on his cheek just like Teddy. It was Teddy, my old friend who had disappeared. Teddy was here all along. Teddy, my mother, and God knows who else, all living in this hellhole. Who put them here? As my body began to tremble, I tried to gather my wits. I heard footsteps coming from the other side of the wall. The eyes of everyone suddenly began to blink rapidly, like they were trying to tell me something, trying to get me to escape. It scared the ever-loving life out of me to the point of soiling my pants. I turned around and quickly ran through the door, out into the fog once more. I ran to my car, not caring about closing the door. A million thoughts swam through my head. Why were all those people, including my mother and Teddy, in there? How long had they been hung up on the walls with tubes running through them and their mouths sewn shut? It was clear to me that someone had abducted these people and tortured them to the brink of hell. Whose footsteps did I hear? I needed to tell my father what I had seen. I quickly got in my car and backed out of the driveway as fast as I could through the fog. I managed to drive safely without crashing into anything, and I was on my way home, feeling foolish and cowardly for running. Thoughts ran through my head, maybe I missed something. I was simply too scared when I heard those footsteps and saw everyone start to blink. I felt like I had let everyone down who was clamped to the walls like they were simply paintings. I burst through the front door, yelling for my father. There was a note on the kitchen counter which simply read, "He has come home." It was clear to me that my childhood town of Osaka was not the town it seemed to be. The house on the hill kept a dark secret that had loomed over this town since it was built.